And our guest, as you know, is His Excellency Yuri Vorontsov, who is the ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States. He was born in 1929 in St. Petersburg. He's a graduate of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. He joined the Foreign Service of the Soviet Union in 1952. The next dozen years or so were split between service at the United Nations and in the Foreign Ministry in Moscow. And for 13 years, he was stationed at the American Embassy in Washington. He served as the USSR's ambassador to India from 1977 to 83 and to France from 83 to 86. He was the head of the Soviet delegation to the Belgrade Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. In 1986, he became the first deputy foreign minister of the USSR, and concurrently ambassador to Afghanistan 88 to 89. He was appointed in 1990 as the permanent representative of the USSR to the United Nations and the representative of the USSR on the Security Council. In December of 1991, he was appointed to the same two positions for the Russian Federation. And in 1994, became ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States. It's tempting to ask the ambassador to look back, in spite of the fact that the topic this evening is the future of American-Russian bilateral relations. But the ambassador is in that unique and fascinating position of, at age 62, becoming the representative to the UN of the Russian Federation as opposed to the Soviet Union. He, along with Americans of his generation, have a unique destiny. Some people think of the Cold War period and the policy of the United States having been containment pending accommodation, with two distinct notions involved, and the accommodation of the then Soviet Union as the final end in a quest for a stable world order. That particular quest is something that is still going on, and serious Americans as well as Russians are deeply concerned with what the nature of that future stable world order might be. And while certain Americans might emphasize the road to democracy and others the question of stability and Russia achieving her historical place in the international arena, there seems to be one American consensus, and that is that the future of Russia is absolutely central and critical to the stability of the region and the world, and that Russia, by all measures, has a dignified and appropriate place in that global order. There are a myriad of fascinating questions, of course. It's a historical moment in which the United States hasn't fully developed its policies, and whatever the Russians decide to do is of critical importance to all of us. Ambassador Vorontsov is a man of long experience, very senior positions, and brings wisdom that we look forward to benefiting from. Ambassador Vorontsov.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. And I'd like to express my gratitude for this invitation to come here and to talk to you, and what I consider most important, to answer your questions. I don't want to preach very much. I'd like to be to the point. What interests you, and I'll try to explain our position, situation, and all that. But basically, I will start with a very simple, but I think very important premise. That is the importance of the relations between our two countries for the world. My experience was the experience of the Cold War, as well as this period of improving relations between our two countries. So I can say that during the Cold War period, we were playing with the future of the world. Playing meaning that sometimes the actions in the foreign arena of our two countries were not very, I would say, clever, sometimes very reckless, and we several times brought the whole planet to nuclear catastrophe. There have been such periods. I can cite 3 cases when we have been very close to nuclear war between our two nations, which means nuclear annihilation for the world. About something around 1975, maybe some of you remember, there was a publication on the pages of the New York Times, a letter of President Eisenhower to one of his friends, and the friend, and it was after when President Eisenhower was not with us anymore. One of his friends allowed the publication of this letter, in which, among other things, President Eisenhower said to his friend that there have been 2 occasions when the Joint Chiefs of Staff recommended to him to drop nuclear bombs on the Soviet Union. One occasion was the height of the Korean War, when the Joint Chief of Staff stated that the assistance of the Soviet Union to the North Koreans should be stopped, and for that purpose a nuclear attack should be arranged. And the second instance was when the Soviet Union developed the hydrogen bomb, very close on the heels of the United States. When you developed your hydrogen bomb, we developed our hydrogen bomb, and that was the suggestion of the Joint Chief of Staff to drop nuclear bombs on the establishment or whatever, the facility where the production of hydrogen bombs were. In both cases, that meant, of course, the beginning of nuclear war. And President Eisenhower states in that letter, he said, I contemplated for some time, and I rejected on both occasions this recommendation. But we were that close to the nuclear war. Suppose President would have taken this suggestion and dropped the bombs, and then the Soviet Union would drop the bombs on the United States and arrange an attack on Europe of conventional forces and all that, third World War with nuclear elements in it. That means annihilation of the world. And a third occasion was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuban Missile Crisis, you remember, was initiated by the Soviet Union, bringing missiles on the Cuban soil, and that has been discovered by the American intelligence. And then there was exchange of all kind of pleasantries between the two countries, as you remember. But there was a meeting about 4 years ago of the veterans of the Cuban Missile Crisis, American generals and the politicians who were very much present in the picture at that time, and Russian politicians and generals. And they exchanged their views, opinions, assessments. What was obvious at that meeting, and they have been surprised themselves, they did not understand each other's moves completely. They were preparing for something that the other side was not planning to do, preparing some kind of replies in military ways. And one of the ideas was that the United States should bomb these missiles. And that was seriously considered by the Americans. And at that time, during the meeting of the veterans, the Americans said, and that was our plan. We suggested to the president at that time that why to have this long story? Let's cut it short. We shall bomb and destroy these missiles and finish to the whole business. And the Russians said, yes, we expected there could be a possibility of that. So a Russian general said, I was in charge of the missiles on Cuba at that time. And my orders were then to launch the nuclear missiles, which were not bombed, but launch in the direction of the United States, in Florida and so on. The Americans said, but what's the use? There were no warheads. He said, how come no warheads? Warheads were brought before the missiles were there, and they were stored in a shack. And you didn't know, you didn't photo them because they were not visible. Missiles were visible on the ground. And the Americans paled immediately. They said, there were nuclear warheads? He said, yes, of course. For all the missiles, they were standing a little bit aside. So that would mean you have capability and could have struck United States with nuclear weapons? I said, yes, that was my orders, said Russian general casually. And that was by mistake. It could have been a nuclear war arranged. And then, of course, the American reply to the Soviet Union and this and then. By miscalculation, by a lack of knowledge and lack of intelligence, that could have happened. So we have been very close to all these terrible things, and I don't know what we have done so good that God did not allow us to plunge into this terrible thing. Really, people were responsible at that time. They unfortunately brought it to the brink, but they didn't come over the brink at that time. Responsibility. Khrushchev, of course, was defeated in that Cuban situation, but he retreated. At least he had the courage to say, okay, I'm taking them back, I'm taking them back. That was a defeat, political, not a military, but political, but that was defeat for the good of both countries and the world. So we had our tense moments. We had almost created unbearable situation to this planet of ours. We didn't do it. And that should be a lesson. That should be a lesson for us, for the future. So far as nuclear weapons are concerned, unfortunately, we still have tremendous amount of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, we are not planning now to attack anybody in Russia, but we still keep these warheads because the Americans have the warheads. And the Americans keep the warheads because the Russians have the warhead. We must find the way out of that nonsense. Yesterday, as you have heard, President Yeltsin suggested that he will dismantle the warheads from the missiles that were targeted on the NATO countries. That will be gradual dismantle, but that is good. That is good because the missiles and the most destructive ones are on the positions with the warheads attached to the missile. And the launch could be done, command for the launch could be done in several seconds, and the button pressed, and all this nonsense will fly in the direction of each other with tremendous destructive power. If yesterday's decision would be copied by the Western countries, would be a great step forward, at least to take the warheads away from the missiles. We were dreaming, we in politics were dreaming about this for a long, long time, suggesting to our military in the Soviet Union times that how long it takes to put the missile back on the warhead back on the missile. And they said, well, about a day or something like that. Why can't you take it away and store it away? You will have a day to put it back in case of need. Hopefully there will be no such need, but at least that will be something that we should do to the nuclear threat. Well, we can do better than that. So the experience of the past is needed. We must remember all the mistakes we made, all the tragedies we almost made. We must remember all this to continue in our relationship between our two very important countries in the world. Well, sometimes people say here in this country, well, Russia is in disarray. Russia is not powerful anymore. There is only one superpower in the world now. It's the United States. Well, I cannot congratulate you with that because Russia is still a superpower. It's there. And what superpower meant during the Cold War? The economic success, it was always on the side of the United States. The wealth, always on the side of the United States. Money, Soviet Union never had extra money. The armies or military potential, that was more or less equal during the height of the Cold War, so far as the personnel is concerned, tanks, things like that. But what made our two countries superpowers, this is the title that we have been given by the world, nuclear capability, the capability to destroy each other and to destroy the whole world. Unfortunately, we still have this nuclear capability, the United States and new Russia. Not that we are threatening anybody with this capability. Both countries are not threatening. not the United States, nor Russia. But we still have it. And that superpower label should be, I think, understood properly. We must do something not to have this nuclear capability. Steps are necessary now to move ahead with nuclear disarmament. It's feasible. We can do it. We don't need all this nonsense in thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons. By the way, nuclear weapons in other use are not very useful, only for nuclear annihilation of the whole world or each other. In other areas, you cannot use it. For example, you had a big conflict with Saddam Hussein. You didn't use nuclear weapons. It could be done like that with nuclear weapons. No Saddam Hussein, no Iraq, no nothing. No Middle East, by the way, as well. You didn't do it because of that, because it would destroy not only this precise country or dictator or something like that. It will destroy millions of people around. We had a very serious reminder, many people have noticed that, what nuclear war means. That was Chernobyl. The explosion on a peaceful nuclear power stations in Ukraine, Chernobyl. There was one nuclear reactor which actually exploded. And the havoc it created in the world and the shudder was very serious. And the nuclear cloud went and covered half of Europe at that time. In the neighboring Belarus, up till now, the terrain is not livable, though some people live there, because it's contaminated with nuclear material. And you don't know what to do with contaminated nuclear earth. What do it? Move it? Where? To whom? In what direction? Who needs it? And keep it there, then people cannot live there. Children are being born with all kinds of defects, and cancer is spreading around in these areas and so on and so forth. But that was equivalent of an explosion of 1/3 of the smallest nuclear weapon. Only. So, anyhow, we are proposing now, and the United States is considering, to go to the START 3 nuclear disarmament negotiations and agreement. Going down, the American side agreed to go down only to 2,000 warheads. Only to 2. We said, why 2,000? Who needs 2,000? If we are going to eliminate this terrible evil, let's go to smaller figures and then invite the other nuclear countries like China, France, and Britain to join with us and eliminate their own arsenals, which are comparatively small with Russian and American arsenal. But somehow, but even going down to 2,000 will be a great benefit to everybody. So we suggest, let's sit down, let's talk about this, let's destroy this terrible stuff. It is still dangerous to the world, and it is very important for our relationship to go ahead in this direction. We have now agreement between Russia and NATO. It's a fresh one, only 1 day old, good agreement. But at the same time, we are a little bit surprised, actually, why the enlargement of NATO is needed. First of all, in Russia, after we changed and started on the democracy way, we asked, and by the way, that was accompanied by withdrawal of the Russian forces from Europe, from Eastern European countries, from Eastern Germany, withdrawing back to the territory of Mother Russia. Then withdrawing our Russian forces from Ukraine, Belarus, well, Baltic republics as well, moving everything back home. And dismantling, because now we are demobilizing. Now we have the armed forces about 1.5 million, which equals the armed forces of the United States. 1.5 million in both cases. So we moved all these things back, and there is no threat for these countries whatsoever, because we are contemplating still downsizing the armed forces even still to 1 million, something like that. And at the same time, we are receiving a wonderful news that NATO is enlarging its military component, not the political structure. Political structure, we wouldn't mind. We were surprised. Why military alliance, military machine, should be now enlarged and moved closer to the borders of Russia. Going into Poland with the American armored division, that means going in the direction of Russia. By the way, through Poland, well, I don't think that the United States have this idea in mind, but through Poland, Napoleon went and invaded Russia. Through Poland, Hitler went and invaded Russia. So historical comparisons immediately spring up in our mind. Why you are moving your forces now to Poland? What's the reason? Well, the agreement that we have signed with NATO in Paris yesterday, it provides for some understanding that there is no need to move big forces into the territories of the new member states, which are supposed to be three independent states now, Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. But it is not spelled out directly there. We wanted to have this spelling out. We wanted to allay the fears of the Russian people about this eastward movement of the NATO military machine. It didn't happen, but, well, at least we have an agreement that we will be working in that direction. So now we are going to see what actually is going to happen. If the tanks with made in the United States mark will start rolling through Warsaw to the borders of Poland with Ukraine and so on, that will be, I would say, a panic in Russia. People will say again, it's happening again, but we don't understand why this time. Not that we understood why Napoleon attacked us, or Hitler also didn't expect that and didn't think that it's going to happen. But why, again, eastward movement? I'm not touching on the whole issue of NATO. NATO is also not quite relevant now. When we are talking about the future in the relations between Russia, NATO was built as a shield against Russia. In the Soviet Union, they were saying, no, it's not a shield. It's a machinery for offensive. It's an aggressive force. Well, let's put the labels aside. It was a military machine aimed at fighting with Russia, in case Russia or Soviet Union moves westward. Now nobody wants to move westward. But still the machine is there, and machine is being enlarged now. That was strange when the first noises were made about enlargement of NATO. I was ambassador here already, and that was in 1994. And I immediately contacted top people in the State Department and some people who initiated this idea. I said, what are you doing? Do you understand what kind of impact is going to make, this idea is going to make inside of democratic Russia now? And they say, it has nothing to do with Russia. It's the enlargement of the Western Bloc and has to do with Eastern Europe, nothing to do with Russia. I said, you don't remember history or something like that? How come it has nothing to do with Russia? The whole bloc existence of NATO is because of the Soviet Union, in which Russia was a part at that time. And you say now that the enlargement of this bloc has nothing to do with Russia. And besides, if you are doing this, what weapon you give to communist opposition in Russia? And at that time, 4 years ago, the opposition was still strong. And the battle between democratic forces and communist opposition was still not quite decided. I said, you are siding with the communists now. They will exploit this, and they will turn it against the democratic government of President Yeltsin. Immediately, you're playing into the communist hands. Why don't you see it? And they said, no, we don't have such ideas. We are not looking in that direction. We are working inside of our Western alliance, and that is all. It's not always. Look a little bit more around. It's not all. I said, if you, for example, invited Russia to join NATO, that would be a different story. You are enlarging the bloc. You are saying, everyone who wished to come into this bloc, we invite you. Well, going to be a big organization, maybe all European organization, including Russia. Well, they say, no, God forbid, Anybody but Russia. I said, thank you. On behalf of the communists, I am telling you, thank you. You're giving them these weapons. Why are you doing this? Well, somehow it was not understood in this country. It was understood in Europe, by the way. The Europeans were saying, well, we don't know really why we need this enlargement of NATO. There is no threat to the East Europeans, not even threat to the Baltic republics, which were the most, eager to say that they need protection from this big neighbor of theirs. And we asked them, but you are all members of NATO. You are the ones who insist that it should be enlarged. And the Germans and the French and the Italians said, oh no, we didn't initiate that. Who initiated that? They said, across the ocean, our friend. Europeans understand that it is something which is not very needed at this time for international relations on the European continent. In the big scheme of the United States, maybe it plays some role, but for the Europeans, not that necessary, indeed. They were thinking about new European organizations, Western European Union, European Defense Pact. That's why they started to talk about European entity inside of NATO and all this, but the United States said, no, don't even think about it. No European entities, no nothing. The French said, Southern Command, maybe you'll give us to the French. It's very important. And the answer was, don't even think about this. The American general or admiral will be commanding, and so on and so forth. So practically, we think it still is a big mistake. Yes, we signed the agreement with NATO, and we would like to see what will come out of that. We don't want to have the appearances of an aggressiveness in Russia against NATO, no. And we don't want to panic, to arrange panic among our people. So we say, with NATO, we want to be friends. We want to be friends with all the countries and the whole military alliance in general. That is the agreement. But we say enlargement of NATO is still a mistake. It's a big mistake of historic proportions. Why? Because it, again, entrenches the division in Europe. There are some countries which will be in NATO and some others, meaning Russia, which is not going to be in NATO. So again, there will be a dividing line. Who needs this dividing line nowadays? Not Russia, by the way. Not Russia at all. So our policy will be still ahead. We will be trying to convince the Europeans, the Americans, the Canadians, that you don't need NATO now, enlarge or not enlarge. We need a one family of nations in Europe now. We are building democracy with great difficulties and with not much help from outside, but we're doing it. We're building democracy. You will be helping us. We will be grateful. And we will be one family of nations. Enough of these divisions. Enough of looking at each other through the barrel of the gun, as the Chinese coined the expression. Why? If it is military bloc, obviously there will be. Some people will be looking through the barrel of the guns to Russia, at Russia. And our people, military people, will say, but we have a big machine beside us. We are military. We must take some preparations as well. Since they have the big machine, we need to have something as well. That means militarization. That means military buildup. We don't like it. We don't want it. And we don't have money for it. So we will be talking further with the United States, first of all, and we are doing it. And President Yeltsin is committed to this idea of switching our relationship away from any semblance of military confrontation. We don't need it, absolutely now. There is no reason for you or for us to do it. Some people in Washington keep telling me, oh yes, you're saying it now. Now really maybe you're right, but what if in 3 years or something Zhirinovsky will come to power? To which my reply is, first of all, he is not going to come to power. He's sliding down now. The communists will not come to power. They're also sliding down. Still have some positions, but they're sliding. But then the answer is, if really you are afraid that Zhirinovsky or somebody like him come to power, Then do your military preparations. Why now? Why with Yeltsin at the helm in Russia, with the Democrats who are now fighting for the economic development of country and so on? Why you concentrate on the military side? Let's forget about it. So that will continue, and that position of ours is very firm. We intend to pursue it at any meeting between our two presidents or the other statesmen or of public figures and so on and so forth. We would like to tell the Americans, don't be that mistrustful. Of course, we understand that things are changing fast in Russia, and things are not changing here very much. And you have still these memories of the Cold War and the fears and apprehensions and all that. But it's better now to trust each other gradually, at least, to be closer to each other. One of my ideas personally is to bring our military closer together. And when I have the possibility, I invite the military, and then I say to the people in Pentagon, sit down with them. If you wish, in my embassy, I'll put some drinks on the table. So talk, not just look at each other through the barrel of the gun. Talk to each other. Find out what you are suspicious of or what you don't like at each other's attitude, and we will straighten this out. The politicians will work on that, but you military should be. It's a fact. There are none Russian officers in the American academies. Now, I say, is it right? There are Polish, there are anybody, German. I was speaking at the Defense College, for example, Defense Academy in Washington, and was lots of foreign officers. Any one of you is Russian? No, silent. The others are. Why not? Then I talked to the commandant. I said, why you're not inviting Russians? He said, I am not inviting anybody. They're the bosses in Pentagon and so on. I talked to the bosses in Pentagon. I said, why don't you invite? And by the way, there are not very Americans in the Russian academies. The same thing. So I would like to tell you in full earnest, that must be done in both, on both sides. When it comes to some concrete and very important, though maybe small, examples of our military doing something together in the world, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example. There was a Russian brigade standing shoulder to shoulder to the American division. They are wonderful to each other, and they like it very much. The soldiers, the young officers, and the elderly generals who are less enthusiastic, but the young people are absolutely enthusiastic. And whenever somebody visits, like your Secretary of Defense visits the American division, they all come to the Russian brigade, and then they come back and they say, wonderful relationship, it's so great. I said, no wonder we have been shoulder to shoulder during the Second World War. No wonder. I have seen it myself. And I welcomed the American military at the Victory Day in Moscow. The Americans were all in the windows of the embassy, and there were lots of military, of course, at that time. And there was a tremendous crowd of Russians, and I was there among them. And we waved and shouted and all that. We have been shoulder to shoulder. We can be, and we will be. Further down the road, it's very important how our relations developed. We would appreciate very much your economic help in our reforms. We are going now through a tremendously difficult period inside of the country, of tremendous financial crisis. We have done well so far as privatization is concerned. The country was 100%, the economy was 100% belonging to a state. Now 70% of the production in Russia is being done in the privately owned enterprises, 70%. Only military-industrial complex is in the hands of the government, and some railroads and electric power stations, things like that. But all the rest in the private hands. In the private hands, it's fine, but the private hands have rather empty pockets. They don't have money to go on in their new privatized factories, enterprises, this and that. No funds for development further on. The government takes the policy that, first of all, we must fight inflation. And we have done tremendous thing. The inflation 3 years ago was the figures of 300% or something like that. Today, the inflation this year in Russia is 20% a year, about 5% monthly. Next year, the government says it's going to be 5% inflation in the yearly amount, a year. So they're not printing new money, they're cutting the expenditures anywhere. They're cutting the budget now. They're sequestering the budget because they don't have enough funds for lots kind of items on the budget. They're cutting it by 20%, 1/5 of the budget. They want to be realistic, the government. That is fine, but at the same time, those private businessmen who acquired through the process of privatization, they didn't buy it. They acquired. It was given to them. This is yours. Now work on this. That's your enterprise. They got it, but they haven't got the money to run it. And they turn to the government and say, oh yes, thank you very much for this private property and so on. Give us now the funds. The government says, no, we don't have money. We will not print money for the sake of giving it to you. You have to work within this financial system. And they turn to the private banks. It's now about 2,000 private banks in Russia. That's too many. We all understand, and some of them are not very good banks. But they're being weeded out, so the strong banks will remain pretty soon. But even the strong banks, they say, no, we're not ready yet to invest. We're ready to accumulate further on our assets, but investing into the industry or agriculture, we're not ready yet. Maybe they are not. Maybe because they don't have billions as well. Yet. They will. So the private entrepreneurs are not getting any help from any area. The most expectations are for the investments from foreign countries, foreign investments. They're coming, but very slowly in a very small amount. All the direct investments now in Russian industry is $5.5 billion, out of which the Americans take place number one. You're the champions. You're number one because you have $3 billion invested into Russia up till now. I asked the Chinese ambassador, I said, what's American investments in your communist great economy? And he said, about $20 billion. How do you like that? In democratic Russia, somehow American business is still cautious. In the communist China, I asked people on the Wall Street, I said, what's the problem? Why China, why not Russia, democratic? And they say, it's stability in China. In your country, things are not stable yet. I said, you would like for us to return to the communist stability? Yeah, and have KGB arrange very good order and law. And they say, no, of course not. But that is that. We need, of course, not $5 billion. We need a tremendous amount of investments. We are not asking for handouts. We're asking to invest in our very, very developed economic system. For example, we suggest that the conversion should be supported of our military enterprises into peaceful production by foreign capital. And President Yeltsin, while in New York and talking to the people on Wall Street, he said, I'm ready to sell you, I'm ready to lend you military factories, convert them and do something good out of them. Actually, they are the best in Russia because we were producing during the Cold War good armaments. They're the best. They have lots of qualified labor, engineers, brilliant engineers. Science is working close with the military-industrial complex. So the potential there is great. It's only to start and turn them into producing something meaningful for the civilian population of our country and maybe for populations of other countries as well. And somehow nobody invests in the military-industrial complex. That is strange and unexpected. because we thought that it's in the interest of everybody, in the interest of the United States, in the security interest of the United States, to turn that military producing machine into something else. But it is not happening. Some explanations I have received do not satisfy me completely, for example. They say it's costly, it's better to build close by another plant, but not to convert a tank plant into producing of tractors. Maybe. But again, build close by, something like that, but use these labor, people, engineers, and all that. Investing in Russia is not dangerous, because we are not a backward country industrially. We have tremendous resources, natural resources in the country. Some American oil companies are interested in developing oil resources in Sakhalin, the Caspian Sea, here and there, but still are interested but not going on completely. They say there is not enough legislation in Russia that would defend their rights, which is true. That is true. The legislation is non-existent so far as the work of the private enterprises are concerned. In the Soviet Union, there was no private enterprises, there was no legislation, and there is no experience in producing this legislation. That is a fact. But we will be doing it. And now the government is trying to do its best in pushing the Duma, the parliament, into adopting the legislation. All this is true, but at the same time, the government gives guarantees. They say, yes, there is no legislation. We are running the country now, not the law, because there are no law in these specific areas. We are giving you guarantees, governmental guarantees, that you're not going to lose your money. We can have specific agreements with you. Do it, come, and let's do it together. So maybe that will come. The time will come when the countries will come. You know, today I think they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. That was a grand plan, not very costly one. Somebody suggested to me, someone who remembers it, he said the whole thing was less than $30 billion, cost the United States, less than $30 billion. And you saved Western Europe. And you saved Western Europe from communism. And that was clearly stated by Secretary of State General Marshall at that time, why you are doing. And that was right. And that worked. Question, why you are not doing it then to save the Russian democracy? Why the Western, I'm not suggesting that the United States alone should now do this, but why the Western countries, while celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, will not arrange something like Albright Plan for Russia? Huh? Why not? And about $30 billion, $40 billion altogether will make tremendous difference. The assistance to the Russian private sector, private business, to the privatization of Russia, to the reforms. Because we will do it. It will take more time for us. During this more time, the sufferings of people will continue. It's now, people are suffering. The factories cannot work at full speed. Some of them do not work at all, no money. And people are not getting salaries. The others are not getting their pensions paid at the proper moment. There are delays, 3, 4, 6 months sometimes. Pensions are not being paid. That's suffering for the people. And same with the salaries. Also, teachers are not receiving their payment correctly, and they continue going to the school every day, but they receive payments only at the interval of 6 months or something like that. How they live between these 6 months, I don't know. The doctors are not receiving payments properly and on time. So we need now help, and we need to have a push to the privatized economy to go along these lines and to catch up with the rest of the world. And we have, it's not an empty space. We have industry, we have agriculture, we have science, we have universities which suffer now also with lack of money and so on. So some kind of plan would be a great idea now. And I think it's another maybe historic mistake. It's a historic mistake. Why the Western world, which is quite affluent now, cannot organize a special plan for Russia. I wouldn't say that it's only Russia alone. The other former Soviet republics, now independent states, they suffer as the same way. In Ukraine, the biggest of them, situation is even more difficult. Even situation with privatization is more difficult. They haven't embarked on this road properly. When we are almost finishing privatization, they're only in the middle of it. I wouldn't say beginning, but in the middle of it. And they have the same problems. No capital, they need investments, they need also other things like gas and oil. At least we have this one in our country. We are, by the way, we are supplying gas and oil to Ukraine, and they're not paying us. And their debt is collecting higher, and several billion already dollars. What could be done? We can cut, of course, and we could be very selfish. Oh, no money, no gas. What they will do, how they will survive. So we continue on this, and it's tough. We would rather have some money for all these things, and then we'll have better budget to pay pensioners and teachers and doctors. But something we cannot do in this way. So other countries need it also. Sometimes you can have in the press here some beginning of talk about imperialism of Russia, of Russian Federation, that Russia wants to control the former republics of the Soviet Union. Former republics of the Soviet Union want to be closer to Russia now, economically. Politically, no. They say no. Independence, sovereignty, no. Our own government, our own president who travels and meets other presidents. They like it. But economically, they suffer because of cut ties. We had a common market in the Soviet Union, and there was division of labor. This side of the country is producing only this, the other side is supplying them with the other things, and so on and so forth. Division of labor, a natural thing in the common market. Everything has been cut and crushed. And they suffer more because they're smaller, their economies are smaller. And we have infrastructure for a big state because the Soviet Union infrastructure stayed in Russia. And they're building their infrastructures now as independent countries, independent economies. It's very tough. For Kyrgyzstan, for example, a small mountainous area where they have muttons and a little bit of uranium and nothing else. So how you build the infrastructure around which, around the sheep or something like that? No. They're also in great difficulty. So they're knocking at our door and saying economically, let's restore the ties, let's restore the common market. And in Russia, there is no great willingness to be in a hurry so far as this is concerned, because our economists are afraid that if we start working now on these areas again, then we outstretch ourselves. We don't have enough means to start our economy working properly. But if we'll have to help these countries seriously to the left and to the right, then we'll be stuck economically. So imperialism only exists in the minds of some reporters. If you look what happens with our union with Belarus, Belarus knocked at our door and said, let's unite together in one country. And Moscow said, no, let's wait, let's have a union or some arrangement. No, economically we cannot unite with them. We can undermine the developments inside. Slowly, but we are managing to go out of the rut. Otherwise, with these additions, we will sink again. No, there is no Russian imperialism, but of course, like with Ukraine, we would like to help them. And we help them in any way we can, like supplying gas and oil, which we have in abundance. But no, not further down the road, not at all. So there are problems. And here I say that Americans' help will be very much welcome in the form of investments. There are some business people who are buying factories in Russia, pharmaceuticals, for example. One big California company bought 4 pharmaceutical plants with 4,000 workers in each of the plants in various parts of Russia. And I personally was very glad to see it happen because the plants started to work. The workers who were sitting there idle and not receiving salaries are beginning to work and getting salaries. The factories producing all kinds of medical supplies to the country. It's a positive sign. Okay, some communists say that it's terrible, selling out the country to the Americans. Well, it's not terrible to the workers who are beginning to work there. Nothing terrible. And to the people who needs medical supplies and all that, it's not terrible that they work well. So it would be fine. To sell everything in Russia will be difficult, as a matter of fact. It's a huge country with huge economy. But some of the things, if the others will buy, we'll be only glad. It will be a real help. So this, in the economic field, it's more or less clear what we should do. We should understand the problem of Russia, you in the United States, and if you can invest, we will invite you to invest. Don't be afraid. I mean, you, the whole country, your business community, don't be afraid. Invest, and then the country will be developing faster and in a more assured way along the democratic way. That is very important. Politically now, our relations are good. Well, despite all the skirmishes around NATO, it's not that important. We are working together. Our 2 presidents have tremendous relationship between them. They can discuss everything in a very serious way, despite the difference in the age. They're really friends. I've witnessed it for many occasions, and that is great. And that is to the benefit of further development of our relations. So we are looking forward with optimism so far as the development of our relations between our 2 countries. That will be very healthy to the rest of the world. Many of the other countries are looking at the attitude of the United States towards Russia and seeing that kind of openness, discussion of the economic things and some movement in the economic way. They will also invest and go along this way. We understand it. So that I am absolutely sure that the future of our relations is going to develop in the positive way. And you shouldn't be afraid of an economically developed Russia. Some people here in the United States say, well, that's a giant. If we help them to stand on their feet and compete with the United States, it will be not what we want. No, the world is big. We will have enough application of our resources and labors, yours, and so on and so forth. And we can dovetail each other in many instances than 1 or 2 or whatever. So I don't think you should be afraid of economically developed Russia. But even if you are afraid, well, you cannot help it. We are going to be a big economically developed country. That depends only on time and how long the sufferings of the people will continue. We have a Russian proverb, and it's an old Russian proverb of centuries ago. It says, the Russian peasant prepares a horse for a ride for a very long time, but when he begins to ride, he rides fast. Well, we will show it to you later on. Thank you. Your questions now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is open for questions. Yes, sir. Is there a mafia element interfering with business in Russia? And if so, what can you do about it? And if it's a myth of the media, how do you deal with it?
As I said, it's true. Yes, the criminal elements are now rather visible. Those who existed during the Soviet Union, they were underground. Now they think that their time has come. They sprang up, grabbed something, and so on. But that's the only thing, that they're visible now. They have been invisible before, now visible. Some people are asking me, why mafia? Do you have many Italians in your country? I say no, we don't have Italians at all in our country. But mafia, we do have, like you're in Italy, in the United States. Well, you had it in your period of history, you had something like that. It was visible during the Prohibition era and just after that. It was visible what mafia was doing here and grabbing some industries, this and that. You experienced it before, now you have your mafia underground somewhere. But you have it. You have it and we have it. If you give us recipes how to work with them and how to annihilate completely mafia, we'll be only grateful. But for the time being, yes, they're visible. Yes, they are arranging fights. Yes, they're arranging killings of bankers, for example, of people with money. They're still trying to divide the money. Later on, I think some of them will be very reputable businessmen after they get 20, 50 million dollars or something. Or billion, they will be very, very respectable if they get it.
Mr. Ambassador, it's a wonderful thing that our nations are on essentially the same path at this time, and we certainly appreciate your position with respect to your role and your nation's policy. We wish your nation the very best and hope that wise heads will work in a sensible path toward a stable order. Thank you very much.
I thank you. You were such a wonderful audience, and you were so hospitable. I'd like to reciprocate. Please, next time we meet, come to my embassy in Washington. It's not far away, so please come. I'll be very glad to entertain you in our beautiful marble embassy there and answer more of your questions. Thank you very much.